we always say that the relationship between Israeli companies and Japanese corporations is really creating a synergy. Together we can create great value. So we always say Israelis are making 0 to 1 and Japanese are good in making 1 to 100.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Lomitech, and sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and Birthright Excel. Welcome to another episode of 20-Minute Leaders. Today I'm honored to have Noa Asher with me, the CEO of NTT Innovation Laboratory Israel. NTT Israel serves as the focal point for NTT Group companies in Israel, and their mission is to bring value to NTT by collaborating with Israeli companies and academia in various fields. NTT is one of the major players in the Japanese communication market and is considered a Fortune 100 company with over $100 billion of annual sales, more than 300,000 employees worldwide, operating in 80-plus countries. From 2014 to 2020, Noa served as the economic minister at the Israeli embassy in Tokyo, where she was in charge of promoting trade and investments between Israel and Japan, supporting the revolution that happened during this time in the business relations between Israel and Japan. Noa joined the Ministry of Economy in 2002 and held several positions at the Foreign Trade Administration and the Innovation Authority, including the commercial attaché in Chicago. Previously, she was the legal advisor in a group of startup companies. Noa Asher, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders from Ra'anana, usually before Tokyo, but now Ra'anana. Welcome. How are you?
Great. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to learn, all about Tokyo, Japan, Israel, relations, trade, economics, and the NTT Group that you're a part of and what you're doing there previously with the embassy in Tokyo, but now a part of NTT. So really, really interesting things. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself dealing with the economics and trade between Israel and Japan.
Wow. Long story. I actually started my career at the end of the 90s as a legal advisor in a group of Israeli startup companies. So that was when the whole bubble started. Israeli VCs were established. And I worked mainly, on a day-to-day legal issues and also investment rounds in the startups. I didn't like being a lawyer at all. I left maybe 3 years after when I was accepted to the diplomatic course at the Israeli Ministry of Economy and Trade. I spent 18 years there, so 2002 to 2020, which were really, really amazing, exciting time for me. Very diverse. I could really feel that I'm making an impact. A lot of independency, a lot of responsibilities in different positions that I held. I started there at the Asia Pacific department when we just started all the relations with China. We actually had a very large delegation in 2004 to China. We had 200 Israeli businessmen going there. And the whole kind of hype about Israel and Asia started. Of course, China at the beginning, but I'm very happy to see the tilt moving into Japan as well. After working at the Asia Pacific department, I moved actually to the Chief Scientist Office. Today, the Innovation Authority. I spent there a few years as the Chief of Staff, working with the Chief Scientist on some reforms or new programs, new projects that will help and support the Israeli industry. Then I moved to Chicago. I spent 5 years in the US as the commercial attaché at the consulate in Chicago. Very exciting time working on promoting relationship between Israel and the Midwest, 14 states in the Midwest. Mostly I was focused on medical, life science. I worked with all the big names in the area, Baxter, Abbott, Medtronic, to bring them to collaborate with Israeli companies in that field. I also had the opportunity to spend 1 year at the Harvard Kennedy School as a Wexner Fellow, where I did my master's in public administration, which was really great time. Mostly for me, meeting so many different people from different countries that are in high positions we could really study and learn from each other. This was great. I came back and I worked at the Ministry of Economy, heading the financial department, promoting new programs that will help Israeli exporters work in international markets. And then I was very fortunate to be appointed as the economic minister at the Embassy of Israel in Japan. I spent 6 years there, 6 years that could really, be defined as the revolution time in terms of the economic relations between Israel and Japan, where Japanese companies, Japanese government started seeing Israel as a legitimate place to do business with. And also, this was actually part of the 2014 Kayden Ren visit to Israel. They said that it's not just okay to do business with Israel, but it's also beneficial to both sides. So that was when the Japanese industry started understanding the value that the Israeli industry could bring to them and help them stay as global leaders, global innovation leaders, or try to be global innovation leaders and stay in the competition. So 6 years in Japan, very exciting. I came back in August 2020 and I was very happy to receive a proposal from NTT. NTT realized as well that they have a great value to earn from having a center here in Israel, and we established the center on July 1st, so 2 months ago. We are very new, and we are serving as the focal point for NTT Group companies. There are 989 companies in NTT, to the Israeli innovation. So we are here to help NTT Group companies work with Israeli companies, identify opportunities for investment, for collaboration, for joint R&D, for new businesses, distribution of Israeli products and technologies. And we are working mostly now as matchmakers, identifying the needs and the opportunities in Israel and trying to establish new platforms that will promote this collaboration.
Incredible.
Sure.
So take me back a little bit. Tell me about the Tokyo landscape, where you spent some time, and both, in relation to Israel, but also, what's happening there in terms of innovation, technology, and how is Israel playing some role within that?
So, Japanese economy is one of the largest economies in the world. It's now number 3, used to be number 2. It had the 2 lost decades, maybe now a little bit more, trying to figure out, after all the big companies such as, the car manufacturers, Panasonic, Sony, and others started losing their status, their global status. They're trying to find out ways where they could really stay in that competition and achieve new value. Israel was not on the map of the Japanese industry until 2014. There was very limited collaboration between Israeli and Japanese corporations in terms of investments, in terms of joint ventures. There was almost no knowledge, actually, about Israel in Japan. And that's where everything started to shift. In Japan, government-to-government relationships are very influential. So they influence the industry top-down. And in 2014, there was a visit of the Kayden Ren to Israel, as I said before, which are the big organization of all the big companies in Japan. And that's where they said that it's legitimate and beneficial to do business with Israel. Then we had Netanyahu, our previous prime minister, visit Japan in 2014, and that's where everything started to roll. So it was like a rock was moved out of a dam, and the river started streaming.
What was it about the visit that opened the canal and opened the stream to allow for this?
So this was the Netanyahu's visit. After that, he had very close relations with then Prime Minister Abe. They decided on collaboration in various fields, cybersecurity and others, and R&D. A few months after, he invited actually the Minister of Economy in Japan to come to visit Israel, and July 2014 was when the first time that the Japanese Minister of Economy came to visit Israel and signed an MOU for joint R&D. This is something that we worked on for many, many years, and it was finally done then. And then Prime Minister Abe visited Israel January 2015. And every time there was such a meeting, such a summit, new agreements were signed, new declarations. In January 2015, actually, the Israeli government received a resolution to promote the relationships between Israel and Japan, seeing Japan as a strategic partner economically, politically, and we were fortunately allocated with great budget, and we could do many different programs to encourage those relationships. So one of the things that we did was actually campaigning for Israel. We were campaigning, so we will be able to create awareness in the Japanese industry, working on showcasing Israel as a startup nation, as an innovation hub, which is very, very relevant for the Japanese companies. We always say that the relationship between Israeli companies and Japanese corporations is really creating a synergy. Together we can create great value. So we always say Israelis are making 0 to 1 and Japanese are good in making 1 to 100. I actually had a visit of the former CEO of Sony in Israel, Mr. Idei, and when he came back, he told me, you're saying it wrong. You should say Israel is good in making -1 to 1. So coming up with a new disruptive idea and bringing it to the table, and then the Japanese corporations could start working on that, collaborating on that. So we really see that this synergy being created between Japanese and Israeli companies, and it was like almost tabula rasa. So almost nothing was done before, almost no connections were there. And from 2014 to 2020, now even more, and even though we are facing COVID, we still see the great growth in relationship. There was, as I said, a revolution in terms of economic relations. The investment went from almost nothing to more than $8 billion in Israel. Japan became a very important investor into the Israeli industry. In 2020, if I remember correctly, Japan became 12% of the FDI towards Israel, invested 12% in Israel. So they became a very important player in the Israeli economy. There are acquisitions of Israeli companies by the Japanese corporations, many joint ventures between them, a lot of great projects and collaboration. And also as a government, we were able to create all sorts of platforms that could promote and encourage this relationship. One of the platforms that we started is called JIN. This is the Japan-Israel Innovation Network, and it's actually a network of all the important economic organizations, both in Japan and in Israel. In Japan, those organizations are really leading the industry. So Keidan Ren, as I said, Keizai Doyukai, which is an organization of the top executives of the big companies in Japan, all of them were part of our group working together to promote a relationship. One of the greatest milestones was in January 2019, when the then Minister of Economy from Japan came to Israel with 200 businessmen from Japan. Top executives from 99 Japanese companies, they came to Israel, and we organized a festival, a JapanIsrael festival, created hundreds of meetings between those corporations and the Israeli startups and companies. And this, everything that you do is really influencing the industry. The Japanese companies like to follow, so they usually are not the first to initiate a new trend, but then when they see so many executives, government, everybody is working with Israel, every day that I was in Japan, I met a new company that I wasn't even familiar with. Companies that we tended to see under the radar. So I don't know, companies of a value of $1 billion or 900 million. But those companies are very relevant to do business with Israeli companies. They're interested in new businesses. They are interested in acquiring new Israeli companies. So it kind of influenced the whole industry, not just in the Tokyo area, but also in more remote areas in Western Japan, in Osaka, Kansai area. We saw great joint ventures and great collaboration.
Incredible. What about the culture differences, right? I mean, the two very strong cultures. How did that come into play as you were witnessing the beginning of trade and investments?
So we when you have the map of the Israeli and Japanese culture, this is 180 degrees. It's so different and it's so opposite. So there's a lot of negotiations that needs to be done here. And this is where I think I come in with my 6 years experience of working with Japanese companies and managing a Japanese team at the embassy. But there is a great difference. But that's where I think really the capabilities of the Israelis and the features of the Japanese are really completing each other and creating this synergy. Israelis have to learn how to work with Japanese. For Japanese, harmony is maybe a top value. So there is no win-lose situation. You're only creating a win-win situation. You're looking at your partner. You want the partner to benefit from the transaction. You want to have a long-term, a long-term relationship that is based on trust. It's very important for them to create this harmony, to be full board on the collaboration. And it's hard for Israelis. They have to change their mindset. They're not here to win. They're here to create this harmony of working together and understanding the needs of the other side. There are many differences, and I can talk about it very, very long. And there are a lot of things that Israelis have to learn. The biggest challenge for us Israelis is the speed. Speed of making decisions is in Japan is very, very slow. Sometimes it's too slow for the Israeli startups they need to understand what's going on very, very quickly, and they always have other opportunities. So this is a great challenge that we have to overcome. We are trying to navigate and bridge those differences in order to make it more valuable for Israelis and for NTT not to lose great opportunities that they have here in Japan, in Israel.
We can talk about this for so much longer, but I want to get to know you a little bit better as well. Take me back, before you were legal advisor and in the ministry, what fascinated you as a kid? What really sparked your curiosity?
So I think from a very young age, I love traveling. I spent 2 years in junior high in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, somewhere up there. And every minute that we spent there, when we arrived, my father bought this trailer and we traveled everywhere. We drove to Alaska, we drove to US, everywhere, and I just loved it. I could never handle routine life. This was very hard for me as a lawyer, I think, and I loved traveling. I spent those years in Canada. After that, I kept on traveling. I worked at the military as an intelligence officer in the foreign relations at the intelligence forces. I always liked this exposure to foreigners. I always liked learning about new cultures. I always liked traveling. I worked when I went to law school, I worked as a flight attendant in El Al. I just enjoyed this type of life, and I think that my career in the ministry really feel that need.
And what inspires you right now in the day-to-day?
So, the transition from the public sector to the private sector was very dramatic for me. I loved the feeling of making an impact. Working at the ministry, I really felt that I could do good for the Israeli economy, for the Israeli industry. I was very attentive to the needs of the Israeli industry, and I felt that I could really make those changes, different programs, support them in many ways to make this impact. Now at NTT, I'm not working for the Israeli government, but I am working for the Israeli industry. NTT, it's a whole world, it's a country. There are 989 companies under this group working in more than 88 countries and regions. It's a huge conglomerate working in many different fields. We are here focusing on cybersecurity, digital healthcare, and AI, but every day I discover a new company under NTT Agrotechnology, working on agrotechnology products, and also NTT satellites, everything. So every day I discover a new company. We receive requests from cybersecurity, as I said, to energy, to agrotechnology, to fashion tech. So I feel like I'm very, I'm here to help the Israeli industry and create value for NTT. So I'm here, I really want this feeling of making an impact, a contribution to Israel.
And if there are a few words that would describe you, what would they be?
I thought about it. I'm a mother. I think this is my first thing. I have 3 great kids. I'm a matchmaker. I've been doing this since I was 10. In 4th grade, I was the matchmaker of the girls and the boys. I was bridging them, and I think I took this ability to my career. So I think I'm a matchmaker still. A wife. Hopefully my husband can describe me like that, but balancing this work-life thing, so mother, matchmaker, and wife, I think.
I love it. Thank you very, very much, Noa. This was wonderful. Best of luck with NTT and what you're doing here with Israel, and thank you for your time. Stay safe and stay healthy.
You too. Thank you. It was great talking to you. Bye-bye.